Our last game that we're going to talk about today is a game called It's a Wonderful Kingdom. Now, this was a Kickstarter title. We did not back it on Kickstarter. Actually picked this one up in retail, so all the images we're going to show you are from the retail edition. A few people have asked us on the channel. They knew that we didn't back it, and they've said, have you had a chance to have a game of it? Because we did a full review of It's a Wonderful World, and we love It's a Wonderful World, and we have always spoken about how much we enjoy that game, and that was the reason we didn't back It's a Wonderful Kingdom, because we weren't sure whether we needed another game that was so similar.
And it already plays great at 2.
Yes, so that's the thing. With It's a Wonderful Kingdom, this is a 2-player only version of the game. And what's interesting though is the rule set is very similar in that the way that you're building up, in this case, your duchy or your kingdom realm area, is that you're going to be you're going to be placing cards in the same way that you were doing in It's a Wonderful World. And if you haven't played that game, basically, you are trying to get an engine up and running that's going to generate resources of different types. And those resources are then going to be used to build more cards that are going to help you generate more resources. And so you end up having to prioritize the cards that you build in order to try and get as much of an engine happening as quickly as possible. And there's also an element of producing more of each type of resource than your opponent. And in this game, that core premise is the same, but the way that you're drafting cards in this game is entirely different. So in It's a Wonderful World, you are playing with multiple people. Usually you are choosing cards from your hand, and then you're passing that hand of cards to the next player, and they're going to keep choosing. And you keep going around and around in a regular draft. In this game, you are forcing your opponent to choose between 2 options, cards that are on the left-hand side of the board and cards that are on the right-hand side of the board. You are going to be placing 2 cards down. You can put 2 on one side, or you can split the 2 cards, but you have to put 2 cards down, and then your opponent has to take all of the cards in one area. Now, the reason why you need to be super careful of those face down cards, and the reason why you might want to give them away to your opponent, is that some of those cards in the base version of this game are going to be calamity cards, and calamity cards are worth -4 victory points each at the end of the game. Disaster. That's a lot of negative victory points. So this whole game is about, how do I trick my opponent into taking a terrible card? Or how do I put a great card face down that maybe I want to keep and scare them off taking that card? Because the cards in my hand, there's going to be some that I want to keep myself. But putting them out there for Maggie to choose from is risking losing that card. And you also only have 2 trap tokens, so you need to make a choice of at what point of the game you are going to play those cards face down, or sorry, which part of the round. And then there are 3 modules that come in this game. So once you've kind of got your head around that mechanic, you can add in these different decks of awful cards. And
there's a vermin, there's like all sorts of bad things that can happen to you that actually then have cumulative effects.
But what's really interesting is each player selects a different deck of awful cards, and they are going to have different rules associated with them. But because of the way it works, where you can hide a card and eventually you might be forced to take your own card, is that those awful cards can come back to you. You'll be forced to take those cards back. And so it's just a really interesting dynamic. And some of those cards do things like they freeze other cards in your tableau that you're now no longer able to build until you're able to use your army to defend off these other frost giants in this case. Or with the vermin set, you get rats, and then these rats start to multiply. And if you don't get rid of them, they just multiply, and they're worth negative victory points. And so there's it brings in an interesting element as to why you need to build up and collect soldier tokens in this game, because when you have the majority of resources,
it's called the supremacy,
you're going to be able to eventually get these soldier tokens that are going to help you ward off these negative cards. So this game has far more interaction with your opponent. And it also has far more negative interactions.
Yes.
So that is something to be conscious of. You don't have to play with those modules. If you don't play with those decks of more difficult things to beat, there are 2 alternative modules. So you'll keep the calamity cards in, which is still a negative component, so it's always in there.
Yeah.
But then you can also add in asymmetric kind of player boards, and then like a quest as well. So, and the quest means that you actually have to achieve a certain number of objectives before you are eligible to win the game. If you don't do that, then you can't win. And so, yeah, I actually thought, top line thoughts of this game, it is more different to the base than what the rule set would suggest. So when I read the Kickstarter, it didn't sound different enough to me to warrant having both games in my collection. Now that I've played this, the feeling of the game is so different.
It's like at its core, you're still building the same thing and creating that same engine of resources, but it feels like so much of the game focus is actually on what they call the split and trap, when you're kind of bluffing and trying to get that person to take on those bad cards, particularly when it's bad cards that are going to then have a cumulative bad effect for them. I found that it's sort of like even the first time that we played it, like I could start to feel the tension creeping, going, oh, like it felt like the stakes were higher.
Yeah. And what was interesting is how you then develop strategies. Like the first game, you're like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Maybe I'll put a trap. But then you're like, oh, I get it. Yeah. I get it now. I want to make one side look really attractive and maybe make you take a bad card.
Yeah. So I found that, like, for me, the element that I enjoy the most is actually just like that building up of your duchy or your kind of world. And so for me, this one, that even though I was really intrigued by how stressful and tense it felt, I don't actually enjoy that. Like, I don't like feeling like that.
You looked like you were enjoying it, though. You were pretty smug sometimes when I was forced to, when you got me.
Yeah, there's like that little moment of like, but then ultimately it's like, it's not, it doesn't feel good. And again, that's just like a personal player preference. And so for me, I think I would always, and again, I'm a multiplayer solitaire type person, so I would prefer, like if you give me the choice, I'm going to prefer It's a Wonderful World, because you kind of just get to focus on, the thing that you're building. You've got your campaigns with it, it's like, it's a lot more, peaceful in a way, even though it's not really technically peaceful, but the interaction doesn't feel as confronting as it does in this one.
Interestingly, I felt when I was playing this game, I really liked the twist, and I liked this game more than I expected to, and I'm a bit torn about whether to keep it or not, because I know Maggie will prefer to play It's a Wonderful World, but this game has enough of an interesting twist to me to warrant having both in your collection. It is aggressively mean, and that's something to be aware of, because not everybody likes that. And you're trying to bluff or make your opponent do something that they want to do, so not everyone's going to enjoy that. But I found it really intriguing. I just felt as though I lost control over my own game because you don't know what they're going to take. And so in It's a Wonderful World, the only risk to you of leaving a card that you want to take is that you're passing the hand of cards around. So you have to kind of prioritize what you really want to keep, or what you expect they won't keep when you pass it around. In this one, your cards are in your hand, but your ability to control whether that card is going to end up in your tableau is really difficult, and you actually can't even control the number of cards you're going to end up with. I mean, you can, but you put yourself at a lot of risk when you take lots of cards. So it's just it shifts the dynamic of the game enough, even though the mechanics sitting underneath it are quite similar. So I just thought a really interesting game, a really, really different in feeling.
Really felt like it went into that kind of almost like more chess strategy, trying to get into that other person's mind sort of thing. But then also, that like, do I want to get more cards, even though I know there's some bad stuff in there, or just, because sometimes you can decide to take, if you have 2 of them, you can take nothing. So there can be nothing on one side and be like, I'll take nothing instead of what might be on the other pile. But it does mean that the game lends itself more to kind of like tactics and changing your strategy on the fly, rather than having a longer term strategy, because you just have less control and you kind of have to work with the hand that you're dealt by the end of the round. So interesting game. If it sounds like something you would enjoy, check it out. It's called It's a Wonderful Kingdom. And that
is all of the games we have for you and all of the talking that we have for you for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hopefully we'll be back later this week with a preview that we're pretty excited about, so stay tuned for that. But otherwise, hope you're having a wonderful Monday. Please drop an IAQ in the comments below and we'll answer it for you in an upcoming episode. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.